So, who really calls the shots in a messed up family? Sometimes, the most underrated person is the one holding all the deepest secrets and the strongest cards. And when the sting of loss bumps up against being totally dismissed, what's left of an empire's legacy? My name's Eleanor Vance, and at 38, I've always been the family's fixer. I was the one who put together Thanksgiving dinners, smoothed over heated arguments between aunts and nephews, and ironically, even fixed the roof on the summer house when all the other businessmen were too busy. My dad, a man of means and secrets, just passed away, and the living room, crammed with funeral wreaths and hushed whispers, felt more suffocating than the actual pain of grief. As I straightened one of the silk ribbons that had slipped off a wreath, my stepmom Sarah, with her fake smile and superior gaze, walked up to me. "Eleanor, honey, just make sure the florist delivered the white rose wreath on time. You know, the little things." That line, delivered with her usual condescending sweetness, hit me right in the gut. It was confirmation that, to her, I'd never be more than just an organizer, a fixer of minor issues, while the real power and inheritance were meant for the important people. The truth is, right then and there, I knew her little things were about to become a monumental problem. Before we dive deeper, just quickly drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. And hey, don't forget to subscribe, it really helps the channel out a ton. Thanks. The smell of lilies, musk, and fake grief hung heavy in the air. Arthur Vance's funeral was, at its core, a total show. Condolences were whispered, hugs were measured, and tears, for most, were just a carefully chosen accessory. Me, Eleanor, 38 and with the weight of the world on my shoulders, felt an emptiness that the others didn't even dare to fake. My grief was an open wound, a stark contrast to the perfect calm of Sarah, my stepmom, and the carefully controlled indifference of my half-siblings, David and Emily. David, 40 with a smile that never quite reached his eyes, was more worried about keeping up appearances for Arthur's business partners. Emily, in her 30s, floated among the guests, her melodious voice weaving a web of empty praise for our dear dad. Nobody seemed to notice how off her words were. Arthur, in his last years, was a ghost in his own house, ignored by the very people who were now singing his praises. The hypocrisy was thick in the air like a toxic cloud, but as always, it was up to me to clear it. My adult life had turned into a script of peacemaking, a choreographed dance of forced smiles and small talk. I was the fixer of the Vance family's problems, the one responsible for smoothing things over and sweeping the dirt under the rug. Organize the funeral, Eleanor. Deal with the flowers, Eleanor. Calm down, great-aunt so, Eleanor. Sarah, with her monotone voice and an air of eternal victimhood, was a master at delegating, all while watching me with a look of disapproval. She never forgave my existence, a constant reminder of Arthur's first wife, whom she was always quick to try and erase any trace of. My pain to her was just another hassle to deal with. In the midst of the hollow chatter, I spotted Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer, heading my way with a leather briefcase in hand. Our eyes met. There was something in his gaze, a mix of pity and, maybe, complicity, that got my attention. He was a stand-up guy, one of the few Arthur truly trusted, and the way he looked at me sparked a tiny bit of hope, though I wasn't sure what for. He walked away, leaving me with the feeling that something was left unsaid, a secret about to spill. I kept playing my role, the problem solver, while the irony of the situation gnawed at me. I fixed everyone else's problems, but the biggest one, the Vance family itself, seemed impossible to crack. Truth be told, I was just plain sick of being the moral compass on a ship that was going nowhere fast. Later, when the house emptied out and the silence felt like a breath of fresh air, I went to my dad's office. Arthur's presence was still there in the books and papers. I started tidying up his stuff, a chore no one else would bother with. Among old documents and forgotten letters, I stumbled upon a worn-out leather-bound diary, something I'd never seen before. When I opened it, a folded piece of paper fell out. Inside there was a weird key, dull metal and an unusual shape, and a note scribbled in my dad's unmistakable handwriting. For Eleanor. The real legacy is in the foundations. The funeral was over, but the drama kept going. The huge, old Vance estate, which had been my refuge for so long, now felt like a stage for pure greed. The family gathered not to mourn but to snoop. The tension about the will was thick in the air, as heavy as the dust on the chandeliers. David and Emily, barely hiding their urgency, were already openly squabbling about who should get what. Their voices, which had been so sweet at the wake, now echoed with demands and entitlement. Sarah, always ramrod straight with an air of superiority, wasted no time trying to put me in my place. Eleanor, there's so much to organize in the house. Your presence is essential to keep everything in order, don't you think? Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of an order. She piled me with household and organizing tasks, a sneaky way to keep me busy, and at the same time, cement her authority over me. I, the eldest daughter, the one who actually loved my dad, was relegated to the role of a maid, while they got ready to carve up the pie. I went along with the tasks, but with a completely different agenda than Sarah imagined. I used the organizing excuse to wander around the house, watching and listening. Every room, every hallway was a stage for their hushed conspiracies. They barely bothered to hide why they were really there. Sarah, David, and Emily were clearly more interested in taking over Dad's business than mourning his loss. Their conversations revolved around shares, board meetings, and how to restructure Arthur's legacy. It was sickening. Every snippet of conversation I caught lit a fire of anger in my gut. The way they talked about my dad, almost like he was just an obstacle removed from their path, was unbearable. Arthur, who had dedicated his life to building an empire for the family's future, was now just an item on a list of assets to be distributed. They discussed strategies and values, drawing up plans for a future they could barely wait to kick off. That house, once full of memories and my dad's love, was turning into a battlefield of greed. While I pretended to organize some books in the library, I heard Sarah's voice, lower than usual, and David's, who seemed to be chewing her out. I froze, hands midair, and strained my ears. The advance clause, Sarah whispered, and David finished, and the deadline for selling the foundation property. My heart dropped. Foundation property? Deadline for selling? I'd never heard of such a clause or any property being sold. What were they hiding? The air in the meeting room was thick with anticipation. You could almost cut it with a knife. Sarah, David, and Emily sat bolt upright, their expressions a mix of impatience and barely disguised hunger. I was there too, watching the scene with a strange sense of detachment, despite the whirlwind in my chest. The official reading of Arthur Vance's will was finally about to begin, and I knew this moment would be the payoff for weeks of whispers and scheming. They were expecting a massive chunk of the estate, something that would confirm their power and what they felt they were owed from my dad's legacy. Mr. Henderson, with his deep, calm voice, started reading. The names of charities and longtime employees echoed through the room, and with each mention the tension ratcheted up. Sarah, David, and Emily's faces twisted into a mix of disbelief and simmering rage. A significant portion of Arthur's wealth was going to causes and people they considered insignificant. The real punch came next. A smaller but still considerable chunk was left to Sarah and my half-siblings. It wasn't what they were expecting, but it was enough to keep them antsy, chewing on their invisible nails. Then it was my turn. My dad had left me the old family country house. A place I loved, sure, but in reality it was a total burden. And to top off what they saw as a cruel joke, a monthly allowance described in the document as, to ensure your stability. The room plunged into shocked silence, quickly broken by whispers and exclamations. Crazy! Sarah hissed, her eyes blazing. Senile. David spat while Emily just shook her head, disbelieving. To them it was an insult. My dad, the magnate, the business genius, had left his eldest daughter a country house and an allowance. Sarah, with a sneer that didn't reach her eyes, turned to me. Well, Eleanor, looks like you always liked taking care of the little things, didn't you? Now you'll have your own property to heal and organize. Her words were a slap in the face, dripping with disdain. On the outside I kept my cool, a veil of calm I'd perfected over the years. But inside I felt the weight of the injustice. It wasn't the country house nor the allowance itself. It was the humiliation, the feeling that my dad, after so many conversations about my future and my role, had left me so little of substance. It was a blatant contradiction to the veiled promise he always seemed to make. The note and the key hammered in my mind, but the official will revealed nothing that fit. After the reading, while David and Emily were still grumbling and Sarah was trying to compose herself, Mr. Henderson discreetly approached me. Our eyes met again. With a quick, almost imperceptible movement, he slipped a small card into my hand. If you need something to heal the situation, call me. Your father was a man of details. The phrase, an echo of Sarah's words but with a completely different meaning, left me with the feeling that perhaps the real frustration was yet to come, but also that a piece of the puzzle was missing. The country house, now mine, was both a refuge and a reminder of what I had inherited. The peeling walls, the furniture covered in dusty sheets, and the overgrown garden reflected the state of my soul. It was a place in ruins, but still I felt an undeniable connection to my father there. Every creak of the floorboards, every ray of sun filtering through the dirty windows, seemed to whisper memories of him. As I dusted off an old piano, my mind wandered to the conversations we used to have. He always talked about the importance of solid foundations in business, and how the true invisible legacies were more valuable than what you could see. At the time, I thought he was referring to moral principles or the family's reputation. Now, with the strange diary key and the enigmatic note echoing in my mind, the true legacy lies in the foundations. His words took on a new and unsettling meaning. What did he mean by that? The spark of doubt, ignited by Mr. Henderson, began to turn into a small flame of determination. I needed to understand. I started searching the house, not with the intention of organizing but of looking. Every corner, every object, was a potential hiding spot for a clue. I rummaged through boxes, opened drawers I'd never touched before, my fingers brushing against dust and time. With each passing moment, the feeling that my father had left me something more than an allowance and a dilapidated house grew stronger. Amidst the mess of a small back room my dad used as a workshop, I stumbled upon an old toolbox. It was heavy, made of metal, and smelled of grease and wood. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if Sarah would have had the nerve to go through it. But the accumulated dust indicated no one had touched it in years. I opened it. Inside, among rusty screwdrivers and hammers, I found a secret compartment in the false bottom. My heart pounded. Within it, there was a rudimentary map of the Vance property. Not just the house but the entire empire my father had built. The map was made of thick yellowed paper with hand-drawn sketches and various ink annotations. These weren't ordinary notes. They looked like symbols and letters that didn't make immediate sense. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. My eyes scanned the paper, deciphering my father's marks, the complexity of his mind even in such a simple scribble. At a key point on the main property, where the old mansion stood, there was a tiny, almost imperceptible note in familiar handwriting. The truth hides where the foundation meets the past. A chill ran down my spine. There was so much more at stake than what was read in the will. My father wasn't senile. He was a strategist, and I was about to discover the game. Mr. Henderson's card in my hand was more than just a contact. It was a beacon. That map, with its coded notes, and the feeling that my father had orchestrated something grand, yet hidden, spurred me on. I called him the next morning, and the urgency in my voice was enough for him to see me almost immediately in his office, his expression serious and a little apprehensive. He watched me as I spread the map across his desk. His eyes, always so sober, gleamed with silent recognition. I knew Arthur wouldn't leave things so simple, Eleanor. Your father was an extremely cautious man. He paused, his lips pressed into a thin line. He distrusted Sarah and your half-siblings' greed for a long time. He foresaw how they would act after his passing. My eyebrows shot up in surprise. So, the will? Henderson nodded slowly. That was just part of it. A smokescreen, to be exact. A bigger plan designed to trick the superficial family and protect the true inheritance. Arthur knew they'd be content with what seemed like a considerable chunk, and then they'd turn on each other, blinded by ambition. He picked up a pen and started examining the map's annotations. These symbols, Eleanor, are references to financial records and access codes that only your father and I knew. He called them the language of the foundations. As he spoke, the pieces started to click. My father, the man of solid foundations, had built a complex network, a true financial labyrinth. Henderson helped me decipher the annotations, and what was revealed was mind-blowing. The map indicated the existence of multiple trusts and complex investments, created over decades. Many of them were in the name of unknown entities, shell companies, and offshore investment funds that had never been mentioned. With each name he uttered, each number he deciphered, my shock grew. My father hadn't just hidden part of his fortune. He had pulverized and reorganized it in a way that defied any superficial audit. Eleanor, your father wasn't just a businessman. He was a master strategist, Henderson said, his tone now filled with admiration. He dedicated his last years to building this true parallel empire, protecting it from any attempt at misappropriation. The anger I had felt about the will began to transform into a deep reverence for my father's genius. He hadn't left me helpless, he had left me a challenge. As he reviewed his own notes, Henderson stopped at a specific folder. He pulled out a bank statement from one of those entities I'd never even heard of and turned it my way. My eyes nearly popped out of my head. The amount was astronomical, way more than everything in the will combined. A number with so many zeros my brain could barely process it. Your old man was a master at hiding things. As expected, the calm after the will reading didn't last. It wasn't long before Sarah, David, and Emily started having problems with the properties they'd inherited. It was a script my dad, with his strategic mind, had written to perfection. First came David's hesitant calls, then Emily's veiled complaints, and finally Sarah's furious demands. The properties, which looked so valuable on paper, turned out to be carefully laid traps. They uncovered hidden debts, serious maintenance issues that would cost a fortune to fix, and other legal and financial complications my dad had expertly hidden from their greedy eyes. With each passing day, their frustration grew, and I could practically smell their desperation in the air. They'd come to me, sometimes with fake sympathy, sometimes with blatant demands, expecting me, the fixer, to sort out their messes. Eleanor, the summer house needs an urgent roof repair. Your dad always trusted you with these things, Sarah insinuated, her sugary tone barely hiding her irritation. David came to me with an environmental permit issue for one of the factories he inherited, and Emily with the discovery that one of the urban properties was rented out for a measly amount, with a predatory contract that prevented her from renegotiating. I strategically either refused or offered solutions that benefited them minimally but didn't solve the core problem. Oh, Sarah, the roof? I remember Dad mentioning it was a future project, something that would require a considerable investment. Maybe it's best you hire an outside expert, someone who understands the scope of the problem. To David, I'd suggest revisiting Dad's old files. He used to keep everything, maybe there's something about the permit. And to Emily, just some generic advice about patience with old tenants. I watched their frustration and anger grow, and a strange mix of satisfaction and a pang of guilt washed over me. The guilt quickly dissipated with the memory of their disdain at the funeral, the scorn in their eyes when my dad left me the country house and the allowance. They were reaping what they sowed, and I was just the messenger. With every step they took toward financial ruin, the stronger I felt, the more I understood the genius of my dad's plan. One afternoon, as I was going over some documents Henderson had sent me, I heard David's raised voice coming from the office next door. He was on the phone, and the thin wall was no match for his complaints. I need to sell some properties fast to cover losses. Dad's insolvency clauses. They're choking us. My breath hitched. Insolvency clauses? My dad's web was even more complex than I'd imagined, and David, desperate, seemed to be drowning in it. The cat-and-mouse game was just beginning. David's phone conversation about the insolvency clauses kept hammering in my mind. I knew I needed to dig deeper. With Mr. Henderson's help, I dove into the documents my dad had left behind. What I uncovered wasn't just shocking. It was a betrayal that ignited a cold fury inside me. Sarah, David, and Emily were secretly planning to sell one of the most valuable historical family properties. The original Vance house, where my grandfather was born and where a good chunk of the family legacy was built. And the worst part, they were doing it without proper legal authorization, using a fraudulent contract. My dad, in his wisdom, had foreseen such a move and protected the property through one of the trusts Henderson was helping me unravel. This sale, if it went through, would not only hurt the value of the other properties linked to the foundation but, more importantly, would violate the terms of the secret trusts my dad had set up, which clearly stated that the original Vance house couldn't be sold without the unanimous consent of all direct heirs, a condition they were conveniently ignoring by forging signatures. The advance clause that I'd overheard Sarah mention at the funeral, Henderson explained, referred to an inheritance advance they had already secretly received many years before my dad's death. This severely jeopardized any future claims they might have on the main estate, especially if they tried to contest the will. They were desperate for cash. The hidden debts and the problematic properties my dad left them were suffocating them. They needed this sale to stay afloat. The fraudulent sale of the original Vance house was their last resort to avoid the ruin my dad had orchestrated. Time was running out. The sale was scheduled for the next few days, and I knew that if I didn't act fast, all the intricate protective measures my dad had built would be undone. Anger consumed me, but it also gave me focus. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about honoring my dad's memory and exposing my family's true colors. As we reviewed the details of the fraudulent contract, a name jumped off the page. One of Sarah's lawyers, a seemingly trustworthy man who had been providing services to the family for years, was listed as responsible for the legal validation of the document. Henderson confirmed my suspicions. Eleanor, this man Richard Wallace is helping your stepmother falsify the documents. He has a dubious history and is probably getting paid handsomely for it. Wallace was a familiar face, someone I had seen at various family events over the years. Surprise turned into bitter disappointment. I had to act, and fast, before the sale was finalized and my dad's legacy was permanently stained by greed. The impending betrayal hung over me like a dark cloud. The original Vance house, the birthplace of our history, was about to be sold fraudulently. I felt overwhelmed. The complexity of my dad's plan, once a source of admiration, now seemed like too heavy a burden to carry alone. Nights blurred into a mess of documents scattered across the table, empty coffee cups, and Mr. Henderson's tireless voice explaining clauses and strategies. The pressure from Sarah and my half-siblings mounted daily. David called, his voice laced with impatience, demanding I sort out the paperwork problems of the properties. Emily sent messages with insinuations about my competence. Sarah, meanwhile, preferred the tactic of veiled threats. You know, Eleanor, family reputation is a very delicate thing. A scandal, even a small one, can have irreparable consequences. She tried to undermine my credibility, planting seeds of doubt about my ability to manage what my dad had left me. I felt like I was at my breaking point. Man, the physical and mental exhaustion was crushing, and for a hot second, the idea of just bailing, of letting them drown in their own messes, actually sounded pretty tempting. But then I thought about my dad, his tired face in his last days, that twinkle in his eye when he handed me the diary with the key. All that stuff just fueled me. And above all, the sheer injustice of it all. The way they disrespected him, how they tried to trash his legacy just out of pure greed, it was totally unacceptable. I, the family's fixer-upper, the one who always sorted things out, was about to set things straight in a way no one saw coming. This wasn't going to be about smoothing things over or forcing smiles. This was going to be about the truth. This was going to be about justice. That very night, while Henderson and I were going over every single line of the official will, I'd totally blown off, looking for any loophole, any tiny detail that could be the key. He stopped cold. His glasses slipped a bit down his nose as he traced a line on the paper with his finger. Eleanor, check this out. He pointed to a tiny clause, almost nothing amidst all the legal mumbo-jumbo, that I'd read a million times without really seeing it. It gave me, as the curator named in the will, the right to oversee and correct any action that threatened the family legacy. And more importantly, it triggered an immediate audit if there were any signs of bad behavior. My heart just leaped. The final piece of the puzzle. My dad didn't just give me the tools, he gave me the authority. The trap was set. The tension in the boardroom was so thick you could cut it with a knife, but this time I was cool as a cucumber. With that clause in hand and Mr. Henderson backing me up, I'd called an emergency meeting. In front of me, Sarah, David, and Emily sat there, practically oozing confidence, bordering on arrogance. They were whispering to each other, shooting me dirty looks, totally convinced the meeting was just going to be another one of my needless worries, something they'd just brush off. Henderson, being his usual discreet self, gave a quick intro. Then the stage was mine. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past few weeks in my dad's legacy. My voice, despite the adrenaline pumping, came out firm and clear. By virtue of Clause X.Y of Arthur Vance's will, which designates me as the curator with the power to oversee and correct actions that threaten the family estate, and given the recent irregularities observed in various transactions, I hereby call for a full and immediate audit of all Vance family assets and transactions. The silence that followed was deafening. Shock just wiped the smug looks off Sarah, David, and Emily's faces. Their confidence evaporated, replaced by disbelief. Sarah was the first to snap, her face twisted into a mask of barely contained fury. Audit? Eleanor, have you lost your mind? What irregularities? You don't have the authority for this. David, trying to sound all authoritative, added, "This is hysteria, Eleanor. You don't understand business." Emily, true to form, went for a more personal jab. "You're clueless, Eleanor. Always have been." But I was ready for them. My gaze, which used to always shy away, now met theirs head-on. "The clause is crystal clear, and Mr. Henderson is here to vouch for its validity. The audit is happening. And the irregularities, well, they'll be revealed soon enough." The family business executives and lawyers in the room, who'd seemed like mere spectators before, were now all ears, some with a gleam of curiosity, others with worry. The news of the audit was going to spread like wildfire. They tried, of course. They tried to discredit me, whispered about my inexperience and my supposed emotional instability after my dad's death. But Mr. Henderson's legal backup and my icy composure were enough to shut down their loudest protests. I could see the growing desperation in their eyes as the inevitability of the audit became clear. Days dragged on in a calculated agony. Teams of auditors swarmed the offices, the archives, the finances. Every transaction, every contract, every document was being scrutinized under a microscope. And, just as expected, the revelations started pouring in. The audit revealed, without a shadow of a doubt, that Sarah's and the siblings' transactions, especially the sale of the original Vance house, were more than just sketchy. They were flat-out illegal. Forged documents, fake signatures, dodgy financial moves, it all came out. The property sale was a blatant fraud. The scandal started to spread quietly through the hallways of the business elite, a whisper that would soon become a scream. And I knew the game had only just begun. The audit evidence was undeniable, and with Mr. Henderson by my side, I formally presented it. The boardroom, once the stage for their arrogance, was now the setting for their nightmare. Every document, every phony bank statement, every forged signature was like a dagger twisting in the illusion Sarah, David, and Emily had built. It didn't take long for the news to leak. The press, always hungry for a juicy scandal, started covering the story with a vengeance. The Vance name, once synonymous with power and integrity, was now being dragged through the mud. The family's reputation, which Sarah had guarded so fiercely, was starting to crumble in real time. Headlines screamed about corporate fraud and secret inheritance, turning a family's grief into a media circus. David and Emily, having no clue how to handle the crisis, totally freaked out. Their phones wouldn't stop ringing, and their faces shifted between rage and pure desperation. David tried to blame Emily for oversight failures, while Emily whined about being just part of the plan. They turned on each other exactly as my dad had predicted. Sarah, the matriarch of their little charade, tried to spin the situation. She put out press releases denying the accusations, trying to deflect attention and blame outside enemies. But her lies were exposed one by one. Henderson and I had irrefutable proof of her actions, and with every new attempt at manipulation she just dug herself deeper. The reports were relentless, detailing the sordid mess of financial mismanagement and fraudulent schemes. It was then that the truth about the trusts and the real beneficiaries of Arthur Vance's empire started to come to light. The unknown entities, the offshore investment funds, everything my dad had meticulously planned to protect his legacy, was now being revealed. The fortune, way bigger than they imagined, wasn't theirs. It belonged to causes my dad valued, and, in an indirect way, it belonged to me, the guardian of that legacy. In a tense, final meeting, the lawyers for Sarah and my half-siblings, looking pale and speaking in grim tones, delivered the verdict. Due to the proven fraud and the unbreakable terms of my dad's trusts, they wouldn't just lose a huge chunk of what they thought was theirs, but the remaining properties, which were tied to their debts and insolvency clauses, were in imminent danger of foreclosure. Their house of cards had finally come crashing down. The boardroom was heavy, the air thick with expectation and bitterness. Sarah, David, and Emily sat before Mr. Henderson and me, their faces disfigured by panic and rage. The mask of confidence was gone, replaced by pure terror, the kind you see when someone's whole world is crashing down. Arthur Vance's inheritance didn't just vanish into thin air like you thought. My voice echoed, cool and steady. It was never yours to begin with. With Mr. Henderson laying out the technical stuff, I spelled out my father's elaborate plan. I detailed how each trust was carefully built to protect the real assets, keeping them far away from greedy, careless hands. The irregularities and hidden debts they'd inherited were just gears in the machine. Every crooked move they made, every document they tried to fake, simply triggered the protection clauses my father had put in place. Those insolvency clauses that spooked you so much, David, I said, looking him dead in the eye, weren't there to punish you but to protect what was genuine. The fraudulent sale of the original Vance house was the final nail in the coffin of your ambitions. The properties they thought were the core of the inheritance were actually the bait, the dead weight designed to drag them down while the real treasure remained untouched. Their faces contorted in a mix of shock and desperation. Sarah, who used to call the shots and scoff at everyone, was now pale, eyes wide, the understanding of complete ruin washing over her. David, the self-proclaimed heir to the business empire, was in shock, his jaw trembling. Emily, always the more dramatic one, was quietly sobbing, her high society lady image crumbling along with her expectations. Their inheritance hadn't disappeared. It had simply revealed its true nature, a mirage. What they thought was a big chunk of change was actually a trick to expose their true intentions. And the curator they'd looked down on, the daughter with no business sense, now controlled the empire they thought was theirs by right. The Vance family fortune, once a source of greed and manipulation, was now in the hands of the one Arthur truly trusted. The silence was only broken by Emily's sniffles and the creak of Sarah's chair. Suddenly, like a cornered animal, Sarah shot up with a guttural scream, her eyes locked on me with insane rage. She lunged forward, hands raised, clearly intending to attack me. Henderson reacted fast, stepping between us and holding her back firmly. Her furious shouts echoed through the room, but I didn't flinch. I looked at her, at the desperation and rage consuming her, with a strange mix of sadness for what they'd become and a chilling triumph. I cured my father's legacy of you. The dust settled and the uproar stopped. With control of the true estate, I, Eleanor, began rebuilding my father's legacy in a fair and ethical way, exactly as he would have wanted. The resources which had been at the mercy of greed for so long were directed towards the causes my father truly valued: educational initiatives, environmental research projects, and supporting emerging artists. Every investment was a tribute to his vision, a way to honor Arthur Vance's memory, not as the ruthless tycoon the world saw, but as the man of principles he was at his core. Sarah and my half-siblings were left to deal with the fallout of their actions. Without access to the fortune they craved, their own lives fell apart. The media, which once put them on a pedestal as high society stars, now portrayed them as tragic, petty figures. I didn't take pleasure in their misery, just a cold satisfaction that justice had been served. They were the architects of their own ruin, and my father, in his wisdom, just made sure they reaped what they sowed. My life, once spent trying to smooth over other people's conflicts, found a new purpose. Peace settled in my heart, and the need for approval from Sarah, David, or Emily vanished. My validation came from within, from the certainty of being on the right path, honoring my father's memory and discovering myself in the process. The nights, once filled with battle anxiety, were now peaceful, spent reading my father's diaries, understanding his character even more deeply. The country house, my sanctuary which had been in ruins, was lovingly restored. Every brick, every piece of furniture, was a reminder of the refuge my father had given me, the place where the spark of my revenge journey had been ignited. The garden, once overgrown, was flourishing again, a mirror of my own transformation. Reflecting on everything, I realized the irony of being the curator, who caused so much destruction in my half-siblings' world. But in doing so, I didn't destroy. I brought order and justice to a dysfunctional legacy, one that was being eaten away by lies and greed. Revenge for me wasn't an act of malice, but of restoration. I looked to the future with my head held high, certain that I honored my father and in the process found myself. The pain of loss transformed into an unshakable strength, and strategy became my ally. The girl who was constantly put down turned into a powerful and respected woman, ready to shape her own destiny and continue Arthur Vance's true legacy. So, what do you guys think of this Vance family twist? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Eleanor went too far, or was her revenge more than fair? I'd love to hear what you would have done in her shoes. Don't forget to like and share with your friends. See you next time.